the opening to the book Jaws. The great fish moved silently through the night water, propelled by short sweeps of its crescent tail. The mouth was open just enough to permit a rush of water over the gills.
The novel Jaws and the film transformed what the oceans were like for me as a young kid. I've read the novel about 5 times and watched the film over 40 times. And I went to Martha's Vineyard where Jaws was filmed. I kidded myself that I was going on a spiritual quest, but actually I was going there to see every place where Jaws was filmed. I went out into the oceans and my wife said to me before I went, there aren't any great white sharks there. I went, no, there aren't. I found out in a documentary about a year later that they'd put some buoys with sonars in that area of the water, and they'd had 47 sightings of different sharks that summer. I didn't know that when I went swimming, and I thought, I'm going to experience it. I'm going to swim out of my depth into the water. There was no one else on the beach, and I swam out of my depth, and then I realised that I was out of my depth and I had that panic of, I'm out of my depth. Great white sharks can come from literally nowhere. I need to swim back in. So I turned around and I thought, don't swim frantically because that attracts them. And I swam back. And then when I got to where I could walk, I began to walk back. And this French family, I could tell they were French from their language, came down in, not that they were speaking badly, it was their accent, you understand, and that it was French they were speaking in. They came down onto the beach, little girl about 3 years old, mum and dad. And as they were walking down, I looked down, and on the crystal clear bottom of the water, there was a massive, and I mean massive, crab. And I went, "Nah!" like a teenage girl, and this French family all looked up at me, and I blurted out, I don't know why, "Don't worry, it's not a shark." And the girl just skittered back from the water. I'm not going anywhere near that, you could see that, and I thought, I've really blown this for them. And I came out of the water and laid down and thought that was a close shave for me. Oceans. 97% of the water in the world are oceans. Genesis chapter 1, the ancient story, tells us that God created the expanse of the waters. Isaiah the prophet tells us that God measures the waters in the hollow of his hand. Not hands. God is so huge that he measures the expanse of the waters in the hollow of his hand. These waters, these oceans are incredible, and God measures them in his hand. We're going to think about a story from Acts chapter 27 today with the Apostle Paul.
Acts chapter 27.
When it was decided that we would sail for Italy, Paul and some other prisoners were handed over to a centurion named Julius, who belonged to the imperial regiment. We boarded a ship for Adramyttium, that's a town of declining commercial importance, about to set sail for ports along the coast of the province of Asia, and we put out to sea. Aristarchus, a Macedonian from Thessalonica, was with us. The next day we landed at Sidon. It's a much fought over port on the coast of Lebanon, with the main temple dedicated to Ishman, the god of healing. This is where Jesus healed the Syrophoenician woman. And Julius, in kindness to Paul, allowed him to go to his friends so that they might provide for his needs. From there, we put out to sea again and passed to the lee of Cyprus because the winds were against us. When we had sailed across the open sea off the coast of Cilicia and Pamphylia, we landed at Myra in Lycia. It has the remains of a well-preserved theatre there to this day. There the centurion found an Alexandrian ship sailing for Italy and put us on board. We made slow headway for many days and had difficulty arriving off Cnidus. Jews lived here, so Paul would have felt at home. When the wind did not allow us to hold our course, we sailed to the lee of Crete opposite Salmone. We moved along the coast with difficulty and came to a place called Fair Havens. This is the last place where they could have stayed sheltered due to the small islands that protected it, apart from in the winter when it was an absolute nightmare. And this was near the town of Lasea. Much time had been lost, and sailing had already become dangerous because by now it was after the Day of Atonement. So Paul warns them, "Men, I can see that our voyage is going to be disastrous and bring great loss to the ship and cargo, and to our own lives also." But the centurion, instead of listening to what Paul said, followed the advice of the pilot and of the owner of the ship. Since the harbour was unsuitable to winter in, the majority decided that we should sail on. hoping to reach Phoenix and winter there. This was a harbour in Crete, facing both southwest and northwest. When a gentle south wind began to blow, they saw their opportunity, so they weighed anchor and sailed along the shore of Crete. Before very long, a wind of hurricane force called the northeaster swept down from the island. The ship was caught by the storm and could not head into the wind, so we gave way to it and were driven along. As we passed to the lee of a small island called Corda, we were hardly able to make the lifeboat secure, so the men hoisted it aboard. Then they passed ropes under the ship itself to hold it together. Because they were afraid they would run aground on the sandbars of Citrus, they lowered the sea anchor and let the ship be driven along. We took such a violent battering from the storm that the next day they began to throw the cargo overboard. On the third day, they threw the ship's tackle overboard with their own hands. When neither sun nor stars appeared for many days and the storm continued raging, we finally gave up all hope of being saved. After they had gone a long time without food, Paul stood up before them and said, "Men, you should have taken my advice not to sail from Crete. Then you would have spared yourselves this damage and loss. But now I urge you to keep up your courage, because not one of you will be lost, only the ship will be destroyed. Last night an angel of God, to whom I belong and whom I serve, stood beside me and said, 'Do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand trial before Caesar, and God has graciously given you the lives of all who sail with you. So keep your courage, men, for I have faith in God that it will happen just as he told me. Nevertheless, we must run aground on some island.' On the 14th night we were still being driven across the Adriatic Sea, when about midnight the sailors sensed that we were approaching land. They took soundings and found that the water was 40 metres deep. A short time later they took soundings and found that it was 30 metres deep. Fearing that we would be dashed against rocks, they dropped 4 anchors from the stern and prayed for daylight. In an attempt to escape from the ship, the sailors let the lifeboat down into the sea, pretending that they were going to lower some anchors from the bow. Then Paul said to the centurion and soldiers, 'Unless these men stay with the ship, you cannot be saved.' So the soldiers cut the ropes that held the lifeboat and let it drift away. Just before dawn, Paul urged them all to eat. 'For the last 14 days, he said, you've been in constant suspense and have gone without food. You haven't eaten anything. Now I urge you to take some food. You need it to survive. Not one of you will lose a single hair from his head.' After he said this, he took some bread and gave thanks to God in front of them all. Then he broke it and began to eat. They were all encouraged and ate some food themselves. Altogether, there were 276 of us on board. When they had eaten as much as they wanted, they lightened the ship by throwing the grain into the sea. When daylight came, they did not recognise the land, but they saw a bay with a sandy beach, where they decided to run the ship aground if they could. Cutting loose the anchors, they left them in the sea and at the same time untied the ropes that held the rudders. Then they hoisted the foresail to the wind and made for the beach. But the ship struck a sandbar and ran aground. The bow stuck fast and would not move, and the stern was broken to pieces by the pounding of the surf. The soldiers planned to kill the prisoners to prevent any of them from swimming away and escaping. But the centurion wanted to spare Paul's life and kept them from carrying out their plan. He ordered those who could swim to jump overboard first and get to land. The rest were to get there on planks or on other pieces of the ship. In this way, everyone reached land safely. This is Bexhill Sailing Club. I was a minister down here for about 5 years, not at the sailing club, at the church, but one of my volunteer leaders was an absolute enthusiast in sailing, and he said to me, "Neil, I want you to come out sailing with me." I didn't really want to do it, but he was so passionate about it. You know, when people get passionate, they draw you in. So we came down here and we went out sailing. It was a windy day like it was today, and we had a 2-person boat and we had to sit on the edge of it. And we went out and I had the life jacket on and all that stuff. Very tight, it was very tight. And the boat kept keeling up like this. I think keeling is a technical word in sailing. And the first time it did it, I felt like I was on a roller coaster. And he said to me, "Don't worry, the boat's meant to do that because the sail is moving in the wind to keep us balanced." I thought, okay. After about 4 times of doing this, I felt quite relaxed and confident. Yeah, I could do this. I'm Ahab himself. Bring it on. And then all of a sudden, the 5th time, he went, jump! And I thought, what? And he jumped out of the boat because the boat had been turned completely over. This huge sails under the water. But I had seen enough disaster movies to know how you react. There are always pockets of air in the hull of a ship when it's sinking. So I went to the right and there was no pocket of air in the hull of the ship. I tried to go to the left. I've just done them the wrong way, haven't I? But you know what I mean. And the sail was there, so I could get past. And I was running out of breath. All of a sudden, I managed to hook myself up round outside of the boat, and I'm hanging on for dear life. And then the Coast Guard came up beside us, and they gave us that look. You know that look? What are you doing in this windy weather when you have not got a Danny LaRue? You have not got a clue about what you're doing. Get in our boat, and we'll take you into safety. We came back in. And we got changed in the changing rooms in a little bit of embarrassed silence, both recognising that this sailing experience for me was a complete disaster. I had absolutely no desire to ever go in a boat again. And if any of you watching are thinking, I can convert Neil, I can save him from his maritime disasters, you can't. I'm never going in one of those boats again. You can't make me do it. I won't do it. End of story. My experience was nothing compared to Paul's. Just listen to a few of the phrases that Dr. Luke, who wrote down this experience, records of this storm at sea. Verse 4, the winds were against us. Verse 6, put us on board. Verse 7, we made slow headway for many days. And again in verse 7, when the wind did not allow us to hold our course. Verse 8, we moved along the coast with difficulty. Verse 9, much time had been lost. Verse 14, a wind of hurricane force. 15, we gave way to it and were driven along. Verse 17, let the ship be driven along. Verse 18, we took such a violent battering from the storm. Verse 20, we finally gave up all hope of being saved. Sometimes we can feel like life's out of control, can't we? That we're caught in a storm on the fiercest of waves and we don't know what to do. We feel utterly powerless. Paul, in his speech to the sailors, after 14 days of not eating food, dragging weights along the ocean, battling against nature itself, says to them, don't be fearful. Have faith in God. And how do they have faith in God? By being courageous. Courageous in Greek, which this is written in, literally means cheer up. Don't come and hit me when you see me after social distancing. It's Paul that said it. In the midst of this awful time, he says to them, cheer up. What does he mean? I think what he's getting at is saying, don't let this external situation completely overwhelm us. Let's have a positive attitude, not a fake one, not a false one, not a naive one, but let's be positive. Guys, be courageous. Cheer up. What you got there? Is that a shell for me? Can you hear the sea? Hear the ocean? It's cool, isn't it? Yeah, you have stereo, you listen in both ears. Good lad. This is where we used to baptise some people when I was at Beulah Baptist Church. It's near the Delaware Pavilion, so all of the churchgoers and some passers-by would be standing up there. They'd be watching. We had a few hundred people watching. It was really fantastic. We'd sing some worship songs. There was one time when we were so cheerful, cheer up, because it was so stormy and we thought we're not going to be able to do the baptisms down on the beach. But the Coast Guard had said, we'll be there and we will tie you to a groin. These are groins. And so they got this huge band and they tied it round my waist and the other minister's waist and tied it to the groin. And then the people that were getting baptised would come down, and it was a lot higher up than the waves are today. And we would baptise them in there. Boy, were they courageous in displaying their faith. It was really easy to baptise them because of the waves. You just had to do a gentle dip back because the waves just went over them anyway. In verse 44, the final verse of this passage, it says, in this way everyone reached shore safely. In this way everyone reached shore safely. Our hope and prayer, isn't it, is that in the storm of COVID-19 we will reach the shore safely. And one way we can be involved in that is when we feel fearful, to put our faith in God and to be courageous, to cheer up, not fake smiles, but to look to the future, believing we will get through this together with God. Oceans, take care and stay safe.